This week on The Wheelhouse. The session starts today. Federal funding cuts and compromise in Connecticut. For Connecticut Public, I'm Frankie Graziano. This is The Wheelhouse, the show that connects politics to the people. We got your weekly dose of politics in Connecticut and beyond, right here. This session, lawmakers say they'll talk about everything from federal funding cuts to the state's regulation of artificial intelligence. Later in the show, reporters Susan Raff and Ebong Udama will break down what to expect in the 2026 legislative session. But first, we're going to hear from party leadership. House Speaker Matt Ritter is next, and then House Minority Leader Vincent Candelora. Hat tip, we taped these conversations on Monday before federal lawmakers agreed on a deal to end a government shutdown. Joining me now is Matt Ritter, Speaker of the House in Connecticut's General Assembly. Speaker Ritter, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thankful to have you on the show here on the day of the legislative session here in Connecticut. Speaker, what are your priorities for this session? What are your colleagues' concerns for this session as well?
Yeah, I'm going to try to answer that succinctly. That's hard to do. There's a lot of colleagues with a lot of different opinions. The budget adjustments are always the main responsibility of any legislative body. So we have to look at where we are in the second year of our biennium budget. We do two-year budgeting here in Connecticut. So there'll be adjustments. Obviously, there's been a lot made about the cuts from the federal government. We've done a good job of, for example, subsidizing those health premiums that would have expired otherwise. We were there to cover SNAP if we needed to. So I think we'll also, be continuing that emergency fund just in case we need it. That's about $300 million. So I think the combination of that and then some budget adjustments should help our residents on issues around affordability. And then just, big bills in our caucus. We want to implement no excuse absentee balloting. The voters overwhelmingly approved that a couple of years ago. We want to make sure we get our statutes updated and codified to reflect that. And, you'll see people worry about issues around public health and vaccinations. And can we strengthen DCF and some of the things we've read about, some of the tragedies we've read about? Maybe they need additional staffing and software tracking and things like that. So those will keep us plenty busy in a short session.
It'll keep you busy. The federal cuts continue, and I understand that's why the emergency fund is there in the first place. You talked about the healthcare subsidies. Do you feel like you need more money for that? Do you feel like you need more money for Medicaid?
Right now, there's a government shutdown, and I don't know when that will end or what will happen. But we obviously want the fund to continue through the end of the calendar year because, again, Congress is on a different fiscal year than we are. Their fiscal year will start October 1, 2026. And we don't want to have to come into session a month before the election to deal with any federal cuts. So that's one adjustment we'll make to the fund. Medicaid is less of a worry in 2026. It becomes a really big problem in 2028. So we can probably wait a little bit to see what happens there. We are changing our software for eligibility on SNAP. They're going to require more testing. So we are making the infrastructure upgrades now to do that. So will we need more money? Maybe. It's hard to say, but we'll have that conversation throughout session. I would remind listeners, there's no state doing what Connecticut's doing. So the most liberal states, the most conservative states, nobody, no governor, nobody else except us doing it.
There's been opportunities in the past to sort of put more money into emergency funds and things like that. Do you think you're at a decent level here now in terms of trying to address this from a state's perspective? We know that the healthcare subsidies have expired at the federal level, and it's really been something that's sort of a catalyst for some of these government shutdown discussions. Obviously, maybe more ICE and that kind of enforcement, but anything else you think you need to do here at the local level?
Look, we provided subsidies for our residents, and those will be backdated as well. So you can even change your plan now, and we would take care of it from January 1. I'm not aware of any other state that has stepped up to do that. It's expensive. There is a limit to what state governments can do to respond to federal cuts. We can't make up for all of those cuts. So we're always open for the conversation. We'll see how the exchange stabilizes or doesn't stabilize in the coming months now that we make our residents aware of the subsidies and went a little close to the deadline. Some people were, November 15th was open enrollment and we didn't announce the subsidies till a few weeks after. So we'll monitor it and keep our eye on it. But I would challenge any state to do anything near what Connecticut has done so far, because they haven't, because we know how serious it is and we know how destabilizing it could have been for the exchange. And by the way, it was bipartisan. Everybody, it was a bipartisan bill in the House to create the fund, and it was bipartisan approval when the governor sent a letter to legislative leaders to do those subsidies for the exchange.
Are you planning any legislation, or are you watching what's happening maybe from William Tong in the Attorney General's office, maybe at the state level? Are you watching here with what's happening with federal integration and customs enforcement action and increased action we're seeing throughout the United States? Is there anything you could do here at the local level?
Well, we updated our Trust Act just in the last special session that we had in November around courthouses and things like that. We'll see what recommendations come out of the Judiciary Committee and from advocates. But a lot of the stuff that you're seeing around name tags, training, warrants, that's going to be mostly at the federal level, which is why I think they're fighting so hard in Congress to get that done. We don't have the ability to, mandate training of federal officers, but we do have the right to make our tweaks in Connecticut that are constitutional, and we've made some, and if we have to make more, we'll look at those.
On the issue of energy affordability, Governor Ned Lamont said that he doesn't believe cutting the state's public benefits charge is the way to handle high energy bills this winter. At a recent CBIA forum, he floated the idea of a one-time energy rebate of about $400 to help people out. There's that. There's stuff you could do, but there's also power generation, which I imagine is very important. Like, what can you do at this point?
It's hard. I mean, we don't control about 2/3 of the bill at the state level. It's all controlled by federal or interstate, regulatory agencies. We could look at a rebate. I mean, look, this has been a cold couple of weeks. People are going to get hit really hard because of that, right? So you're going to see heating bills and oil bills go pretty high when people get them in February. So a rebate's one idea. The public benefit charge, yes, we definitely were able to cut some things last year from it that perhaps should not have led to being on those bills. But a lot of the programs are good quality programs that I think Connecticut residents want to help us transition to cleaner energy sources, solar. So it's not as simple as saying cut all of it or put it in the general fund. So
I was going to say, or subsidize it as one option, maybe.
Yeah, but we've looked at that, and I think we'll continue to look at where we can make efficiencies. But the public benefit charge has some good programs, and the notion of just putting it in the general fund budget, the taxpayers are paying for that as well another way. Yeah,
it's becoming sort of a tradition here at this point, not necessarily a positive one, but here at the end of the legislative session, when you and Representative Rojas are addressing the media, talking about a lack of political will, really, around housing legislation. There was some changes done in the special session, but how much can you really do to try to push some of these towns? I know that there's a lot of talk around what you do with affordable housing, but at the end of the day, in order to get this done, there might have to be a push. We talk about the carrot and the stick approach, but how far can you go to try to get either housing, extra houses built, or more apartment complexes to house prospective people moving to Connecticut or the people who are already unhoused here?
Well, I think there's two different questions.
Sure.
I think housing for a lot of communities is driven by economics. And so for a lot of towns like in Hartford or Enfield that have met their affordable housing requirements, that's an economics issue, and that's working with the municipality to find land that's developable. I think you're talking about towns that haven't met their affordable housing requirements under 8-30G. Look, the Republicans voted against the housing bill in special session because they said it eliminated local control. So you might argue it didn't go far enough. Apparently it went pretty far. What I think that bill did was struck a compromise between the governor's office and legislative leaders like Jason, who worked very hard on that bill. And let's give it a chance to play out. We're not going to have major housing bills this year. We passed a really strong bill in November, and let's see what happens. There's a lot of working groups. There's involvement of COGS. There's plans to be submitted. Let's give that 18 months and then see where we are from there. But it is true that housing is very expensive. So all government can really do outside of sort of the issue of affordability or affordable housing and zoning is you can look at subsidizing housing. And the state does have that, right? We provide a lot of money for first-time home buyers and things like that. But we may have to look more at providing additional financing through CHIFA or others, or CHFA rather than others, to make it easier and cheaper to build homes. It's very expensive right now.
The proposal in November, I guess you could look at it as sort of watered down because it doesn't go as far as Jason's bill did all the way back in, it feels like forever ago, but all the way back in May and June of last year, because we had the whole controversy afterward with the governor asking you all to push that aside and work on it in the special session. So are you at least getting complaints from activists that want you to go even further, or from any kind of entity at this point?
No.
Okay. So you guys are pretty set at that point with housing. Let's move on to the no excuse absentee voting. I'm glad that you brought that up. What is the latest with that? I know you were talking about it as being something that is a priority for you and your caucus here. Voters passed an amendment to the state constitution to allow for it in 2024. What can you do this session to get that done, or what might be the finer points that you have to sort of massage over the next few months?
Yeah, you're just codifying, right? If you right now, if you got an absentee ballot application, it would say, are you out of town? Are you unable to go to the polls for medical reasons? We just got to update our statutes, take all of that out. Now that it's just, you can just say, I want to vote by absentee ballot. It may require some adjustments to some of the election statutes to implement that, working with town clerks' offices on timing, when can ballots be available. There's cure provisions. The problem with absentee balloting, although it's useful, is it has a high error rate. It's close to by 5% in some municipalities. So for every 100 ballots cast by absentee ballot, 5 are invalid because they didn't follow the specific instructions. There are some states that allow you to cure those errors if you're notified in time. So those are things that are some of the more fine technical points you'll have to work through.
Compromise, maybe a better relationship between you and some Republicans in the House in recent years, particularly with Vincent Candelora. Is there a way that there is going to be some bipartisanship, or at least the better question is, where are areas where you all could work together and will work together over this session?
I think Vinny and I work very well together. I've been proud to have his support for my 3 terms as Speaker of the House on opening days. So I don't see that not continuing. Look, I think we've already talked about ECS. We've talked about the use of the emergency fund, which, Vinny helped vote for. It may not vote for the next iteration of it, but he was there back in November. And again, we'll look at the budget adjustments. If we're providing rebates or tax cuts, that's probably something we can do on a bipartisan basis. So as always, there'll be things we can do together, things we can't do together, but we'll always talk about it. We'll try to find middle ground on it. But there are 2 political parties for a reason. There are differences in sort of some core values at the end of the day that you're not necessarily going to be able to get over with 1 or 2 conversations.
Matt Ritter is the Speaker of the House in Connecticut's General Assembly. Speaker Ritter, thank you so much for coming on the Wheelhouse.
Thanks for having me.
From Connecticut Public Radio, this is the Wheelhouse. I'm Frankie Graziano. After the break, House Republican leader Vincent Candelora will join us to discuss his priorities for the session. Hit us up, 888-720-9677. We'll take your questions a little later. You can also hit us up on our YouTube stream. More Wheelhouse is next on Connecticut Public. This is the Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. The state capitol is abuzz today with the open of the 2026 legislative session. What are lawmakers planning to tackle during this short session? On Monday, we spoke with Republican Vincent Candelora about his top issues as the session kicks off. Joining me now is Connecticut's House Minority Leader Vincent Candelora. Representative Candelora, thank you so much for joining us here on the Wheelhouse.
Thanks for having me.
Representative Candelora, as we kick off the legislative session, what are your goals? Can you kind of give us a sense of what is on the front burner for your colleagues? Any concerns going into the session? Help me kind of break it down.
Yeah, I think our concerns are similar to what we're hearing at the national level, that being affordability for our residents. People were hit with inflation, high food prices, and we need to start working on trying to make Connecticut a little bit better. Our fiscal guardrails generated a lot of revenue for the state of Connecticut. We need to get that revenue down to the residents who have paid those taxes. So we're looking at proposing property tax relief in particular. We would like to see more money going into education, which would also, as a correlation, offset property taxes, since education relies so heavily on that real property tax. And then there's other issues we're hearing about that are hot topics: artificial intelligence, government transparency, looking at nonprofit funding, making sure those dollars are used exactly for what we want them to be used for, and we minimize the fraud, waste, and abuse.
There's the fiscal guardrails. There's also rainy day fund money that comes from that. Are you sort of trying to make sure that you and your colleagues, the people in the legislature, can maybe more directly control where that money goes? So, like, I know in the past, some lawmakers have been reticent to spend that money. Are you kind of sort of aware that it might be spent and maybe let's spend it in a certain way? Is that what you're trying to say here?
That's part of it, absolutely. When we put those guardrails in place, the goal was to pay down our unfunded liabilities, which we've put over $10 billion into over the last 7 years. But we also, as a correlation to that, wanted to reduce taxes. If you're reducing your expenses, you should be able to reduce what you're charging to get those expenses. But in Connecticut, that hasn't really happened. So where I've parted from my Democrat colleagues is I don't want to see government grow at the level that it's growing. We need to give some of this money back to the residents of Connecticut because they are truly, when it comes to home ownership especially, they can't afford to pay the taxes that are being assessed on them.
You recently talked on NBC Connecticut about federal funding cuts, saying if you're going to pull back on funding, you need to give the organizations an explanation of why. I'm not sure I have that in the proper context, but if I do, tell us more about how the ping pong of federal funding cuts here, so to speak, particularly the recent HHS reversal to cut $2 billion from mental health and addiction services, impacts the work that you're doing as a state lawmaker.
Yeah, it's a bit of a nightmare, quite honestly. I work with a lot of different mental health organizations. There's one in my community in North Branford. I received that phone call late at night, panicked that they received cuts, which would have them not be able to provide mental health services to children in schools. So that started a little bit of a scramble to figure out why those cuts were happening. As soon as we heard about them, we then heard from the federal government that they were reversing that decision. To this day, we don't really know why they were initiating those cuts. And I think that uncertainty out of the federal government has led to a lot of criticism, and I think it's deservedly so. And it's sort of an unnecessary forced error on their part.
So I would imagine some of that money, too, that might be spent in the legislature might go to cover some sort of healthcare costs. There's a lot of things happening at the federal level, potentially around, obviously, the healthcare subsidies that have expired. There's more talk about Medicaid dollars being allocated here in Connecticut to try to cover some federal funding cuts. Where are your thoughts on what the legislature needs to do on that front?
Yeah, I think the legislature needs to be more prescriptive about it. And I'm a little critical that we're going to create another emergency fund, a $300 million that is going to get doled out. That money really needs to be spent carefully. So some of the cuts at the federal level might make sense, and we have to have that conversation. Some may not. I think when it comes to the healthcare subsidies, we need to roll back some of those subsidies because people that are earning over $200,000 a year probably don't need to get their healthcare subsidized. That's the conversation we need to have. If we're just going to backfill everything, I think it's a mistake for Connecticut. I think we're going to fall into deficit because we just aren't going to be able to cover, not just, I wouldn't call them cuts, but policy adjustments that we're seeing at the federal level, whether it's work requirements or fraud standards. Those things are going to need to be implemented.
What about in terms of housing? This kind of blew up at the end of the session last year, and this was sort of really Democrats fighting over this, and the governor sort of asking Democratic lawmakers to change their tune on this. And then we saw some legislation in the special session that we had. But do you think that housing will be a big thing that comes up here, and namely, maybe it's Democratic lawmakers trying to find some way to push towns and cities to build more affordable housing? Do you expect that to be a big topic again during this session?
So I think the affordable housing issue, the market needs to create. Probably 80% of that housing bill I thought was a decent bill, but the 20% is bad. So I think what we may see is some adjustments being made through session. Towns, I have no doubt, are going to be in litigation over the legislation because it's just ambiguous of what they need to enforce. And I don't think it gives us affordable housing. It gives us apartment complexes and probably lots of them. I think it invites private equity into the housing market, but I don't think it's going to lead toward those single family starter homes, which Connecticut desperately needs. And I think probably the way we're going to need to go is looking at some sort of subsidized program to help encourage that type of construction because it's become too expensive for contractors to build. And we have to ask why.
Much of what's happening at the national level as well is not just talk about how expensive everything is, affordability, but there's also concern about immigration and customs enforcement. Yeah. If any kind of legislation comes across your desk where, I don't know if Connecticut will do this or if this would be a lawsuit from William Tong or something like that, but if anything does come your way, would you support it?
So at this point, I think we are working at the extremes right now when it comes to custom enforcement. We really need to come to the middle. And I do believe that Connecticut law that's currently on the books went to that extreme. So it pushed customs and ICE enforcement onto the streets as opposed to leaving it in the courtrooms where it should be. And so I would like to see greater cooperation at our local and state level when ICE is coming in to arrest a criminal illegal immigrant. But I think we need to strike that balance in Connecticut. When the Trust Act was first passed, it received overwhelming Republican support in 2016. We understood the concept that you want immigrants who are here illegally to have the ability to seek out law enforcement when they need it. And that's what that bill had done. That Trust Act was then amended without any Republican support, and the Democrats took it into a different direction, and they created essentially a gag order where our state and local law enforcement are not allowed to communicate with our federal law enforcement. And this happened well before Trump was reelected into office. But what it's done is it's frustrated the process, and I think that's why we are seeing what has happened in Minnesota. The organizations aren't working together. And so I would hope that Connecticut would just take a more moderate approach in addressing this issue.
In other words, like with what's happening in Minnesota, you're saying that perhaps there's an effort by the local law enforcement there, the local agencies there in Minnesota to work with ICE, maybe, and in return, there'd be sort of a challenge to their sanctuary status. You'd like to see maybe Connecticut's sanctuary rules, that law you calling extreme there, maybe that changes a little bit. And then maybe there's also on the federal law enforcement, maybe they scale back. Is that
That's right. I mean, we're not seeing what's happening in Connecticut, happen. What's happening in Minnesota, we're not seeing in Connecticut. I do fear that could happen. Everything is so politically charged these days, and it's hard to really ascertain the truth. But what I do know is I don't think our laws are set up in a way that is best suited for public safety. And so that's why, I would like to strike that balance. I hear from my local law enforcement all the time that say they're just not sure what they're allowed to do when communicating with federal authorities. It's sort of a crazy way for us to be operating in our state.
Part of the thing that came out of Minnesota and that shooting recently of Alex Preddy was sort of a back and forth on how we view the Second Amendment now in the country and guns. Yeah. I think it was Trump last week who said you can't walk in with guns, you just can't. And then the NRA posted on X, we unequivocally believe that all law-abiding citizens have a right to keep and bear arms anywhere they have a legal right to be. Are you worried about the Second Amendment in that regard? And I guess when I say, are you worried about it, is there anything you feel like you need to do locally to sort of stand up to it?
Yeah, I mean, Connecticut already has the strictest gun laws in the country. And that incident, bad facts make bad laws. And that's what I'm always concerned with. When we saw the killing of George Floyd, the Democrats in Connecticut came out with one of the worst, in my opinion, police accountability bill that really has hurt the way law enforcement is conducted. Again, there were good things in the bill, but there was probably 10% of it that caused a lot of damage. I get concerned that we'll see laws and rhetoric because of looking at that fact pattern. And I think There are certainly issues, I think, to take away. One being for protesters, don't interfere with law enforcement while you're protesting. You're free to exercise your First Amendment rights, but stay out of their way. And I also think on the flip side, we have to increase our cooperation with these agencies. When you start hearing about the individuals that they're arresting, you kind of think, maybe we do want these people off the street. But then you hear the other side saying they're pulling grandmothers out of their homes. We have to stop going back and forth with the rhetoric, trying to sell it politically to the public and take the temperature down.
So you'd like to see more work between local enforcement and local agencies, local states, and the federal government, I'd imagine.
Yeah, and I'd like to see public officials behave like public officials and not politicize everything.
On the issue of energy affordability, Governor Ned Lamont has said he doesn't believe cutting the state's public benefits charge is the way to handle high energy bills this winter. But at a recent CBIA forum, he floated the idea of a one-time energy rebate of about $400 to help people out. What do you think should be done?
We need systemic change. And that's something the governor has been unwilling to do, and I find it frustrating. For instance, in the public benefits charge, there was a welfare program created that if you can't pay your electric bill, you don't have to, and other people's are gonna pay it for you. That program was slated to cost around $50 million a year. It has ballooned to over $250 million just in 3 years, and it continues to climb. Those are programs that we can't put on the electric bill. Not only does it hurt the residents, but it hurts economic growth when businesses are strapped with multi-$1,000 increases to their electric bills. So for the governor, I think throwing money at situations and subsidizing something temporarily is not the systemic change we want. And so I think there's areas of that public benefits charge that we could reduce very quickly by taking those programs out of it.
Connecticut Mirror reporter Mark Pasniokis says you and Speaker Ritter have a legislative bromance of sorts. So take whatever that is. And I don't know I know what he means by it, but I guess what we're trying to get to is what every person always nowadays is looking for, some sort of bipartisanship, some sort of compromise, because we don't see it in D.C. As you talk about, a lot of things are politicized nowadays. Longest shutdown in government history, yada, yada, yada. Is there anything that you all are eager to work together on that's bipartisan in nature?
Yeah, I think we both come at the premise we are going to communicate with each other on everything, and we're going to work with each other until we can't anymore. So there are issues that he'll come forth and say, this is our initiative. If Republicans don't like it, we'll try to change it. And if we can't, ultimately, we'll be at odds. But the goal is always for us to try to, get to a yes and try to do what's good for the state of Connecticut, but not compromise our principles. So while I think we have a very good open relationship and there's a level of trust there, the two of us know where each other is coming from and know where our boundaries are. I'm hopeful that we could do education reform this year on a bipartisan basis. We have done some reforms in the past. Hopefully, when it comes to things like AI regulation, that could be bipartisan. The budget is always the trickier area because, that's a substantial policy decisions that are made there. And, we as Republicans have a growing concern at the level of spending and how much Democrats have pushed the envelope on the guardrails. But we always do try to seek common ground where we can.
In 30 seconds or less, what can you tell me about education reform that you'd like to see? What's the quickest thing that can be done from your perspective?
So I think we need to increase the foundation level. It hasn't been increased in, I think it's got to be over 15 years. And so towns and cities aren't getting the state share of education funding that they used to get. And so as education climbs, we see a reduction essentially in the state share. So I would like to tie that to inflation. I would like to increase the foundation, give real tax relief to the residents of Connecticut, because education budgets are one of the most difficult budgets to pass throughout the state of Connecticut, and we need to provide help.
A lot of work ahead of you, Representative Candelora. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Great having.
From Connecticut Public Radio, this is The Wheelhouse. I'm Frankie Graziano. After the break, two reporters will give us their breakdown of the lawmakers' agendas for the session. We're going to talk to Susan Raff and Ebong Udama. Hit us up, 888-720-9677. You're listening to The Wheelhouse on Connecticut Public. This is The Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. We've heard from Democratic House Speaker Matt Ritter and House Republican leader Vincent Candelora about what they plan to tackle during the first day of the session. Can't have the first day of the session without Susan Raff, who is going to welcome lawmakers essentially to the Capitol and keep some tradition alive later today. Susan Raff, chief political reporter at WFSB Channel 3.
Thank you. I almost feel like a regular this morning.
You are. You're the most regular there is, including Ebong Udama, WSHU's senior reporter, joining us today. Ebong, thank you so much.
Thank you, Frankie. And hello, Susan.
Good morning. It's going to be a busy day for us and hopefully a productive legislative session.
Oh, you said it, although it is a short session, so I'm holding my breath. We hope you'll join the conversation today. Give us a call, 888-720-9677. Although I say all that, and they did have a pretty productive, now that I think about it, special session that was only 2 days long, so...
Yes, they did.
I guess you could get a lot done. Hey, we just heard from Speaker Matt Ritter and Representative Candelora discussing our state's response to federal funding cuts. Sounds to me like there will be little, if any, additional dollars allocated for items like Medicaid reimbursements and healthcare subsidies.
Right. Well, they put $500 million into that fund, right? And I think they've spent about $200 million of it. And it's a very technical thing what they're voting on today and tomorrow. It's basically because they were not in session at the time, it was deemed an emergency. But now it's not an emergency because they're in session, so they have to do it. Republicans, and you heard from Representative Candelora, the minority leader, is not against the emergency fund. But technically, they feel that it gives the governor too much power, right? But let's face it. I mean, is Lamont going to buy a Ferrari with that money? No, he's not. So it's more technical, but I think they both agree because of the unpredictability with the federal government, they have to do something to protect people in Connecticut.
And Ebong, it sounds like Republican lawmakers are more open to surplus dollars being spent. I think we addressed exactly that with Candelora, but it sounds like that's something that they're open to do. Maybe they just want a little more control of it.
Well, basically, they'd like it to be used to give some more tax breaks. And the governor has an interesting way of putting it. He says both the Democrats and the Republicans want to spend about $1 billion of the surplus, although on different things, but both of them want to spend it. And he wants to try and hold the line. So we'll see how that works out.
When it came to addressing SNAP benefits, Speaker Ritter was defiant, saying he didn't think that other states go as far as Connecticut to support residents with things like food and health care benefits. We're going to be talking about SNAP benefits because nonprofits are talking to us about 36,000 beneficiaries or so who may lose access to SNAP.
Well, I think SNAP benefits are a really good example of the unpredictability of the federal government, right? First they were on, then they were off. They were going to be, the money was cut going back and forth. So all of that, I think, is making it very, very difficult for legislators to balance a budget. And I was listening to Representative Candelora, and there might be some way to look and see the benefits. You know, his point of people making $200,000 a year, should they be getting these subsidies? I mean, that's a conversation that lawmakers should have, I think. But by and large, I mean, if you look at most people who are on these benefits, and let's be honest, when it comes to like Access Health or the Affordable Care Act, you know, these are people who can't get health insurance in another way. And so all of a sudden, they're now paying $2,000 and $3,000 a month. They need health insurance. That's a huge problem in this country, not just Connecticut.
So I think one thing that struck me was the fact that they said a lot of the money that they're spending right now is just to conform with the new requirements. So a huge chunk of money, millions of dollars, I believe about $11 million, is going towards adjusting their system so that they can do the checks that are now required by the new federal regulations. So it's a really complicated thing.
And that's what's complicated to me, because they're saying that they're making those adjustments, but that those adjustments could help save some money. But I think the jury's still out on that, on whether or not they're going to need more money.
When you look at SNAP benefits, and I think all of us were very much aware of that, and even people who didn't even know what SNAP was, just a couple of months ago, certainly do now. And going to food pantries as often as I did, and food share, the face of people who are applying for benefits has greatly changed. It's a wide range of people. And so it goes to show you that people are struggling to put food on the table, and at the bare necessity, or the minimum we should be providing food, is certainly for families and for children.
2 bills in the last 7 months, Ebong, or so, to address Connecticut's housing shortage. The first passed at the end of the last regular legislative session, but was then vetoed, as we all remember. Then in the special session, a bill that was, at least to leading Democrats in the state, more favorable to municipalities, passed. A new report presented at a local housing conference, though, and I think you reported on this at Channel 3, Susan, Ebong says that there is a shortage of up to 380,000 units in the state. So, Ebong, where do we go from here on housing?
Let's put it this way. This is an election year. Housing is a very controversial issue. They did a lot of the heavy lifting in the special session to try and get it across the finish line and get the governor to sign it. I doubt that they'll want to deal with. If you notice, when you asked Ritter about it, he seemed to feel that that's not an issue this session.
Very curt.
And I don't think it will be, because this is an election year.
I agree with you. I think Ritter's response was, we did that last year. We're moving on. But I agree with Representative Candelora in the sense that the primary obstacle really is the cost for housing, and we need affordable housing. But it's very expensive to build housing, to buy the land, to conform with sewer requirements, all of that. So as much as some towns, and who is the first selectman from North Haven, who's been a Republican, very out in front and center on this, about trying to encourage cities and towns to want to build. And we need more housing. We obviously do. But I think because housing is so expensive to build, does the state now have to offer subsidies to some of these, companies to build it so that it can be more affordable for people to live there?
One proposal that may be out there, I understand from the Connecticut project, they're working with State Senator Gary Winfield on a renter's credit. Who would benefit? Renters making up to $75,000 a year based on their annual income and how much they pay in rent. I think it would be capped at $2,500 per household. But again, tough road to hoe for any kind of housing advocates this legislative session. As Ebong mentions, it is a election year. We asked about the increased presence of federal law enforcement in cities earlier. There was the Trust Act, changes that were made to that during the special session. Obviously, there may be some federal lawsuits happening, or at least the state suing the federal government. We know that Minnesota is going back and forth, that state, with the federal government. But it sounds like let me just at least get behind my attention. We want to know whether or not Republican lawmakers, particularly like Vincent Candelora, could get behind any legislation to sort of limit ICE if necessary, because at least it sounds like he was talking about it with NBC Connecticut.
Yeah, I think I think we're all concerned about what we're seeing across the country, certainly in Minneapolis. And one of the things that I've noticed with Governor Lamont is, he really tries to be very emphatic and say, Connecticut is not a sanctuary city. Connecticut is not a sanctuary city. I mean, the last thing that we want is ICE to come to Connecticut. I think people can agree on that, right? I mean, that would set up problems. I mean,
they were here.
Yeah, but not to that level. I mean, they're not in our streets, and maybe we're insignificant. We're a smaller state compared to others. I mean, we have lawmakers have taken a stand on, whether ICE can wear masks in courthouses and stuff like that. But it's a slippery slope, and I think we don't want to stand out and have any issues, but at the same time, people are very concerned about what we're seeing in other parts of the country, and could that happen here? Can
you guys help me with where the Trust Act established that ICE agents can't go in Connecticut, or any protections for undocumented migrants in Connecticut in that regard? Like, what what's in place right now in terms of what ICE can't do here in Connecticut?
Well, the main thing is they tried to get ICE out of the courthouses. That was the big issue last year, and they tried to tighten the regulations on ICE coming into the courthouse, but it's still pretty vague. I don't think ICE.
Let's try it in this way.
We haven't had that much of a problem in Connecticut.
Yes,
but we have had a few instances. In fact, there was something that happened just a couple of weeks ago in New Haven. That was a big issue about ICE in the courthouse.
Right. I think it's Bridgeport and New Haven that have seen, most of the activity.
Hamden as well, too, having a big ICE action. Representative Candelora's comment on the situation in Minnesota included a reference to George Floyd's 2020 murder and the subsequent police reform in Connecticut, sort of railing on police accountability efforts rather than, I guess, extensively addressing the NRA and the president's reaction to Alex Preddy's killing. So that's kind of like where I was trying to get to on that is like, are you willing to talk about what's happening in Minnesota? Because I guess at least that's where we're coming from. People are at least watching what's happening in Minnesota, if you don't think it's really happening here.
I think Candelora's comment, too, is that it puts law enforcement in Connecticut or anywhere in the country in a difficult situation, whether it's local or state, because some of the things that ICE is doing are not allowed with state police and local police, and it really creates a lot of tension. And I think if you were to talk to some local police chiefs, and we've seen them in Minneapolis and other places, they're having some challenges and difficulties in what ICE is allowed to do. And we saw that with the shooting of that young mother, people standing in front of the car.
Renee Good,
Renee Good, and stand at the front of the car, to the side of the car. And law enforcement here in Connecticut, particularly state police, are taught, what they can do, and they cannot just fire on a car.
Yeah, too evocative of past shootings we've seen in Connecticut covered by Connecticut Public. Because
I thought it was interesting that Blumenthal, Senator Blumenthal, who's pushing for a regulation of ICE on the federal level, was using the Connecticut example and local police example of what local police are allowed to do and not to do, and prohibited from doing, as a template for the federal regulation of what ICE can do.
He was on CNN saying the very same thing yesterday. I heard him talking about that. And there needs to be some uniformity with law enforcement, and you can't have any rogue elements. And I think people have a right to be concerned about what they're seeing.
Because of recent developments surrounding the death of 11-year-old Jacqueline Mimi Torres Garcia, and even the 32-year-old man who last year set fire to his home to alert people outside about decades of alleged abuse and neglect, lawmakers are getting questions about the state's Department of Children and Families and their oversight of children identified in abuse and neglect reports. Are lawmakers going to take a real swing at that, though?
I think there's a lot of backlash for that. I understand that Connecticut is one of the very few states that doesn't have any regulations when it comes to homeschooling. And I think these recent deaths, and others, there have been others, is it the majority of people who are homeschooled? Absolutely not. So lawmakers are trying to figure out if they can have some checks and balances or well-being checks to see if these children are okay. It's not my understanding that lawmakers want to change the curriculum or tell them that they can't homeschool. They can. But this is a very vocal group who feels that they just don't want any involvement in what they're doing.
We're talking with lawmakers about the public benefits charge in their electric bill and the rebate the governor has floated to help them with their bills. Sounds like that could be about $200. I said $400 in the interview, but some recent reporting by the Connecticut Mirror overnight after I taped that interview made it sound like it could be $200. There's that, but again, power generation, Ebong, Susan, I think that's probably what would be really a savings in the long run, if it ever happens.
Energy is going to be a big issue in this session. because of the high cost of energy and also because it's a campaign issue. Senator Ryan Fazio, who's running for governor,
we're going to talk about that soon.
is using that as an issue, and so something is going to be done. I'm almost certain, but how far they'll go, I don't. I think it will. It is not going to be something fundamental. It's got to be around the edges, but they'll have to do something because affordability is like an issue this session.
Right. So the governor, it is an election year, right? He's putting a tax rebate in his speech, which we're going to hear later on today, about $200 for a single filer and $400 for a married couple. And I think that's an attempt, and it is, to address the affordability crisis. Is it enough? No, it's a feel-good measure for sure. But I think energy is far more complicated than that, and it's going to take years before Connecticut really gets that under control. Will, the public benefits charge, there are a lot of things I think in there that people would like to see. Is it worth revisiting? Maybe.
We got 2 minutes to do this. Let's get in on the 2026 gubernatorial race because Ebong alluded to it, talking about Fazio. We'll do a little Fazio Stewart, but first I want Susan to talk about our newest entree into the race here, Betsy McCoy.
Well, I did have the opportunity to meet her when she put her hat in the ring. I met her down in Greenwich. She really has spent much of her career in New York, and I'm not sure a lot of people really know her. She was lieutenant governor for George Pataki in New York City and New York. She has a lot of energy. One thing I will say, she's 77 years old. And when you meet her, you say, whatever she's having, I want that. She looks fantastic, right? But she's doing some things that, she's going to come to the Capitol. I don't think she has a lot of connection to Connecticut and some of the legislative issues. Will that hurt her? It might. I think Ryan Fazio certainly is much more connected.
Well, the thing about the Republican conventions and their primaries, they love mavericks. They love outsiders. Almost each time there's been a legislator in the race, they've gone for the outsider, the person who hasn't been in government. So who knows?
I'm thinking about McCoy, David Semmerman and Bob Stefanowski. That
yeah.
Right, again, Tom Foley. You have a lot of people who have run Fairfield County. But again, she has not ever won a race. She hasn't been involved in politics in 20 years. And, in New York, the lieutenant governor is on the same ticket as the governor. So they don't run separately like they do here. So I don't know. I'm not sure that she's as involved. One thing that I cannot understand is where is Mayor Erin Stewart? And we really have not been able to connect with her a lot. She's certainly doing things to raise money. But I think that people would like to see...
Are you worried about whether or not half in or half out? Or
No. She's in.
No, she's keeping a low profile.
A very low profile. Thank you, Yvonne. Very low
right.
profile. I think she should be out front center more if she's really interested in leading the state.
I jumped in because that's the end of the show. I could talk to these guys all day. I love these guys. Ebong Udama, WSHU senior reporter. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
And thanks. Susan Raff, political reporter at WFSB News, chief political reporter. Thank you for coming back on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Have fun at the Capitol today.
All right, I promise.
Today's show was produced by Tale Ricketson, edited by Patrick Scahill. Technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Special thanks to Megan Boone, Megan Fitzgerald, Tess Terrible, Connecticut Public's visuals team, and our operations team, Bradley O'Connor and company. Download The Wheelhouse anytime on your favorite podcast app. I'm Frankie Graziano. This is The Wheelhouse.